So yeah, next up, just gonna begin our recording. Welcome everyone to Forging Cross-Cultural and Global Connections with Collaborative Online International Learning, also known as COIL. And Katrine is going to get us started with a quick note, and then we'll begin the panel.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Captioning is available for this session. To turn it on, you need to have an option at the bottom of the screen in the Zoom toolbar that says show subtitles. If you do not see it, it may be if you maybe need to click on more to see that option. There will be also an anonymous survey posted at the end of the session as a QR code that you can scan with your phone, and also as a link in the chat. We really appreciate any feedback because it helps us improve our programming and help us better support AU faculty. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters.
Hi, everyone. So it's me again. So if you don't mind, we have three names on screen, mine, Luis, and Nick, who are about to introduce themselves, and then our faculty panelists who will also introduce themselves. So since we're doing this panel style, I think we're ready to move to gallery. So I think we can stop screen sharing. Thank you, Katrine. And we will begin our discussion. So I'm going to ask our COIL staff to introduce themselves, and then our faculty panelists. So we will start with Louise.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So thankful to be in this space with all of you. Thank you for coming to learn a little bit more about COIL and our adventure, as well as hearing directly from our prestigious faculty members who have gone on this adventure. Sometimes, we can explain it, but there's nothing like, getting it explained from fellow colleagues who have actually gone through it. I think it helps sort of solidify the process and sort of expectations, and also some success stories along with roadblocks. So super excited to be part of this panel. We have some great faculty members that I've had such an honor to collaborate with. So thank you, Shed. Sorry, I could keep going. I can always keep going about it.
We'll pass it to Nick.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nick DeMeo. It's an honor to be with you today and to share the experiences of the faculty members who have joined us, and a little bit of our perspective as well in organizing COIL, how to get started with COIL if you're interested. So yeah, looking forward for the beginning of more COIL adventures.
So I'll ask Professor Ahmed to introduce himself. I know you just introduced yourself to us, but if you don't mind doing it again, please.
And Chad, do you want me to say the same thing again?
If that's okay, yes, please.
Of course. I think you want me to hear me praising your colleague, Luis, and your group.
That's really why I asked you, is so that you would say nice stuff about Luis, yeah.
Well, guys, I've just had the privilege of finishing a course, my regular course called The World of Islam. And this was different, this particular course, because for the first time, we were including a group of Pakistani students based in Lahore from one of the top universities of Pakistan called Beacon House, very well-known, very famous university. Now, joining two groups of students, particularly with this whole background of the world today, with all the tensions in the Middle East and in Asia, is always a very difficult enterprise, particularly for the teachers. You just don't know how this thing will go. And I was always very alert to anything possibly going off the rails. But it all went very well in the spirit of learning, in the spirit of a classroom discussion, debate. And I think that we, the American students, learned a great deal from the Pakistanis and vice versa, which I think is part of COIL. The COIL vision embeds and embodies the notion of collaboration. And that's where the technology comes in. Because of the technology, which is online, we have the capacity to actually collaborate. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult unless you go abroad and you work in the field, which I have done. I've worked in Asia and in Europe, and I've taken my American university students, and that's a long-term, laborious process. Whereas here, it's smooth and it's fast and it works very well. And I had the privilege of Luis, the director, attending some of my sessions and participating. Although, Luis, it was very early in the morning, 8 a.m. in the winter, and yet you came, so I'm really grateful for all your support and enthusiasm. So to sum up, with all the difficulties, different students, both running there, and the local students both running according to a plan, the syllabus which we had prepared, and not an easy syllabus, but running along with us so that both groups of students were benefiting from the syllabus, learning from it, and in a sense, inspiring each other and inspiring us, the teachers.
Thank you so much.
If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, Shed.
Thank you. We're definitely going to ask a lot of questions. I'm really excited to hear about your project. I'm going to pass it to Gorky for introduction and then Lillian.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Gorky Cruz. I run the Language Center at American Clear. And I'm not the one who did the heavy lifting here. That was my colleague, Lilian Baeza Mendoza. So she'll tell you a little bit more about that, but I'm there as a technical support. I had some experience with COIL many years ago when it was a completely different ball game. So now, of course, the technology has moved on, so things are a lot easier in a way, but there's still some, as we said before, some roadblocks there that we have to contend with. So, you know, I was curious and I wanted to support my colleague, and that's where I came on board. And so luckily, you know, we got wonderful partners, and we've been able to negotiate some of these roadblocks to make things work. So it's been a very productive, I think, project for us as professionals, just learning something like new to support our program, which is the Spanish Heritage Program here at AU, and also to kind of like make something more memorable for our students, right? For them, this was actually a quite significant experience. So Lillian will tell us more about that. So I'm happy to be here to support her and support Luis. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. And I guess I'll continue. And I have to say that Gorky is quite humble. He's very much part of a team. And it's interesting because it's something that we can be taught about COIL is about collaboration. And that's an example of that. In the case of my class, and we can discuss that later, it has been essential collaboration with my partner, Luis, my partner, Gorky, and then our partners in Chile. So we will talk more about the details of that class, but that I just wanted to say that. And of course, I know some of you, Lilian Baeza Mendoza, faculty senate past chair, faculty trustee, and as Gorky said, I worked with COIL last fall, and we are working on preparing for next fall, fall 2024, and this is related to Heritage Spanish 3, writing across our culture. So lovely being here.
Thank you, Lillian, and thank you, everyone. So I want to start with just a little table setting for those who may not have heard of COIL before or are new to it. I think a lot of us have interacted with it in one way or another, but I'm wondering, and I'll start with just Luis and Nick. I'm sure you all have an elevator pitch down at this point, how you would describe COIL for those who've never heard of it before.
Yeah, for me, it really is an opportunity to bring in the world into your classroom, leveraging technology, right? The technology that we're all used to and accustomed to, and being able to bring that element of learning to your students, right? It really is an opportunity for them to get some intercultural competencies as far as working together with colleagues, fellow students from other cultures, other countries, in accomplishing something, right? And accomplishing a goal together. Whatever that is for your respective course can look and be different, but ultimately it's to really expose and bring in that world element into your classroom, which is, you know, I always like to say that this is fundamental to what AU is all about, right? It was chartered federally by our Congress to be this institution to support this blowing up of sort of DC embassies and you know and the federal workers being able to have an educated workforce that can provide that sort of expertise to our country and to the world. So I think this is also very connected to the history and the foundation of our university as well, which makes us so unique in this space.
I 100% echo what Luis said, the collaborative component and the collaboration between cultures is so important right now, especially as we already talked about, so much going on in the world. I wanted to alight on the project component of it because big component of COIL is that you negotiate with your international partner and your students to come up with a project to do. And project-based learning is a really great way to have your students get real experience, to meet your learning objectives in a way that isn't perhaps the traditional like midterm final approach to things, but allows for student creativity, student choice, and definitely a lot of equity there as well. So by using these educational and these tech tools that we can teach you about, and you can explore a little bit further if you do COIL, you do tend to hit a lot of the best practices of teaching and learning using technology to collaborate, using project-based learning, thinking about grading in a different way. Perhaps if you're already kind of having students share the workload amongst people and doing a lot of that hard work of collaborating, it actually makes you think a little bit more clearly, perhaps, about what your objectives are in your assessment. So again, echo everything Luis said. It's a really powerful way to construct a course. And I'm excited for our panelists to describe more how that process went for them.
Thank you, Nick and Luis, and that's excellent. And I love the connection to equity there, and to also our students being sort of like tired. Our students are tired, and we're kind of tired. And could this be a creative way to re-engage them in some topics? So I'm wondering if each of our faculty can tell us a little about their project, or what got them interested in doing this COIL project, and who they collaborated with, which some folks have mentioned. And I would love to dive into that equity aspect of it. So whoever would love to get us started.
Well, I want to point out as a former ambassador that very often we scholars on campus are not aware of the law of unintended consequences, that we write a book or we come up with an idea, and it takes time, but it trickles and starts trickling off campus and then all over the place. Now, we are living in a time when America, the United States itself, is going through a very controversial phase of history in its foreign policy. And I think this is a time when it can do with a lot of friends, a lot of understanding. And this is where I think a project like COIL, not intended for the Foreign Office, but does have a great impact on Foreign Office. And I think, Luis, you should talk about this to the State Department, because they will appreciate how significant this work is in creating understanding and friends for them. Because if our course was anything to go by, we literally made a lot of friends for the United States, beginning with the start of terms, so with some stiffness on both sides. Students weren't aware how to respond. They weren't aware of political opinions, feelings, and so on. But as the course proceeded, as the discussion became more frank and never violent, never aggressive, never rude, I was pleased to see, that allowed a dialogue to start taking place, which is essentially what teaching is all about, dialogue and understanding. No one has all the knowledge. No professor can say, I know everything. In fact, you have to begin with the assumption that you know very little, and that it's a teaching process, which is also a learning process. And the students from both sides, aware of this huge chasm which exists, and also the role they were both playing in bridging that chasm, I think would be a lesson for people off campus. And also, Luis, frankly speaking, some of our senior colleagues in administration, if they understood the power, the dynamic power of your course and concept, I think it would benefit them also. This is just my comment, because again, I was looking at it not only from a pedagogical point of view as a teacher, but also as a diplomatic point of view, that what benefits this can bring to the concept and the practice of COIL.
I want to echo a little bit what Professor Ahmed is saying, in the sense that it's very organic, because you start at one point and then there's different things, right, that have to do with your population and the students that are part of that population, and where you want to take things. So in our case, like Lilian and I have been working for years in establishing a heritage Spanish track for our students. We're getting more and more Hispanic students coming into the school. And so we're finding ourselves in the situation where they understand Spanish. Maybe they speak it at home, but they were never schooled in it. And so we can't put them with the folks who are learning Spanish from scratch, right? There's a lot of like things that just don't jive in there. So that's the reasoning behind having that. At the same time, sometimes not everybody in that population, but some folks in that population, they're not necessarily in a position to do travel abroad, for example, right? As we know, one of the things that we are very proud about at IU is like a large percentage of our students get to do that semester abroad, that year abroad, if they can afford it, and it's one of the wonderful things. I mean, changes your life, right? So we will want to make sure that everybody had a chance to do that. And so one of the really cool things about, when Lillian and I started at this, I basically kind of like pushed her and I said, like, yeah, let's just try it. They're starting this thing. It's going to be interesting. I'm not sure how it's going to go, but let's give it a try and see what comes out of it, right? Which now we're very happy that we did. But as we thought about it, and one of the trickle-down things from participating in this project has been, we're trying to consider and working with the administration to perhaps get these students who cannot maybe afford to go away for a whole semester or for a whole year to maybe do a 1 week thing where they go and they meet their Chilean counterparts, right? And this has to do also with the people that we happen to be working with which are very open-minded and very collaborative with us, and we work well with them. And so, we kind of like, we're playing with this idea of what about if we did like a short trip? Can we accommodate that? Can we make that cheaper so that people can afford it, and we can perhaps like just throw in something there to support them? And so they've been very open. So knock on wood, crossing our fingers, in the future, we might be able to incorporate that. And I think Lillian has other projects that have to do, again, with that exchange, in real time, that's combined with sort of like a hook that starts with a COIL component in the classes. So I will.
Well, Gorky, that's excellent idea. In fact, we spent some time in Andalusia, and you're talking about the Spanish connection, and we were absolutely amazed at how much there's interaction and synthesis between Spanish culture, old classic Spanish culture, and the Muslim culture of Andalusia in food, in words. So something like not a couple of 100 words, but 1,000 words are in the Spanish language, which are Arabic. So I've always been fascinated because as an anthropologist, it's such a rich culture. And then how this culture, the Spanish culture, translates into America, South America particularly. So your towns are named after Arabic names like Medina and Fatima and so on. They're coming straight from Andalusia. And I can see Shad moving ahead this way, not this way, meaning she agrees. So these are some things that are surprising to students and to the young, and encouraging to show that there are connections which are very deep and which can be used to create a better world, a more harmonious world. Particularly, I give the example of Andalusia, and a 10-day trip, 5 days in Cordoba, 5 days in Granada, even a week's trip would be life-changing for students. Because the students I took with me, literally, they just couldn't even believe what they were seeing in terms of that very rich culture. And the Spanish there, they're all Spanish. We met the mayor, we met the very senior figures there. The ambassador came down and spent time with us. They were all very, very hospitable. They were very proud of that culture. It had gone, it was in the past, but they were very proud because they said the culture we had was based on the Spanish notion of convivencia, la convivencia, which is coexistence. So it isn't that my culture is superior to yours and you must accept my culture, so I tolerate you. They said, no, that's the wrong approach. It is coexistence. You have your culture, I respect that. You must respect my culture, and we both learn from each other, which I think is the old Socratic method of really improving the understanding between peoples. So I think that's a great idea, and I don't know how far Luis will take this, but I would certainly endorse this.
I can continue. I have to say, I echo what my colleagues have said. I support what they have said. There's so much goodness that can come up from COIL projects, right? It's starting for a stronger team of COILs here at AU to endless possibilities. I mean, honestly, of and responsibility. And I don't want to repeat too much because although I can see a trend of very good positive characteristics right? And outcomes from this project. But I want to go back a little bit what Shed asked about equity, access, even DEI. And I think what I see in common, and this is going back to what my colleague Gorky mentioned, first of all, the access, right, to opportunities outside of AU, but other perspectives as well. Sometimes we all want to do it, but sometimes it's just absolutely not possible, and we have different limitations. And this is what Gorky has mentioned. And in the case of our course, the Heritage Spanish course, it's easy to say that sometimes they're first generation, they don't know what college is, right? They want to learn, but perhaps they don't have the possibilities, right, to do it. It's scary, right? So having projects like COIL is a really like a medium ground to start really practicing and experiencing those perspectives that are different than yours. And that is something so critical that my colleague had mentioned, is that how do you respect who you are, know how to talk about your own beliefs, right? And your own identities, but at the same time, be respectful, right? And receptive to others. In a place like COIL is something that learning really is not in one direction. It's in multiple directions, not even in students. It's also professors, right? Support. So it's just a beautiful thing to see. And the other piece had to do with the EI work. And this is related more to the specific of the course that Gorky and I and Luis worked on with our colleagues in Chile, is that the Heritage Spanish students, as Gorky explained well, these are students that are bilingual, but at the same time, they're always trying to find their place within curricula, right? Their place between, a place that where they can really thrive as bilingual learners, right? Not as a second language learners. So we created this heritage program, and it's a great opportunity for them to learn from one another, to be confident in who they are. But what COIL does as well, and this is what is important, is that now they are the main characters of the class. They're the protagonists of the class. And now they're going to show themselves, right, to another group, in this case, our colleagues in Chile. And having them go through the process is really useful and vital for their self-esteem. So there is something that to be said about elevating those silent voices. And projects like COIL are absolutely essential as we go through different curriculum.
Thank you for that, Lillian. And it calls to mind a phrase that we use a lot in COIL, which is a third space, which is, there's the space of each respective culture and country, but COIL allows you to make that third space. And an important part of that I think, like everyone, including especially Professor Ahmed is pointing out, is the way that study abroad can risk some colonialism in some ways, essentially. And, what does it mean for AU students to travel abroad and go to other spaces? There's almost a sort of opportunity for pushing back on that colonial mindset with that third space. And one thing that we talk about is, is the class going to be in English? Should it be in English? Should it be in a US time zone? It's like folks in the US are very used to things being structured around their schedule and their way of learning. And so I'm wondering, can you speak a little about how your students reacted to that third space and maybe what you saw from it or what they maybe brought to that third space?
Who's the question to?
Sorry, the question is to everyone. I take a sip of water after asking a question because that's what I do as a teacher, so that I won't answer my own question. So that's a reflex. So whoever would like to answer the question, please.
I'll take a gander at it. I mean, I guess as somebody who was there, like, I mean, more as technical support, that something that we hadn't quite considered that would be a problem, because Chile, at some points is in the same time zone as we are, but then they have shifts, when we go into daylight savings time and whatnot. So at some point we're like 1 hour behind, and then suddenly we're like 2 hours behind, and this is happening in the same semester. Okay, so that was one of the things that, when you get on, you want to make this happen, and you're like, yes, we're going to make it happen. And then you get down to the details, and then, like they say, the devil's in details, right? And so you have to kind of sort these things out. And these were some things that we were like, not really, sort of, we didn't see coming. We were very lucky in that the professor that we were working with over in Chile, super flexible, because then again, I mean, you're thinking you're going to match your class with a class somewhere else, but these classes didn't meet the same days or the same times that we did, not even the same days. I mean, and then we have, in addition to that, you have to kind of like account for the difference in the time zone, right? Which for us was kind of like light, when we're talking about 2 hours. I mean, like if you're dealing with Asia or Australia, then you're dealing with a whole different animal, right? So in that sense, for us working within Latin America, kind of makes a little bit more sense. But still, we had to kind of make concessions, right? And so it was about, again, that negotiation, right? So even before the students came on board, we had, I don't want to call them negotiations, but conversations about this and how are we going to approach this, and the goodwill, again, of our partners was like essential, because, sometimes like we just, at AU, we have constraints regarding physical space, as everybody here knows very well. And then, of course, the students, right? Being like, our students are special kind of students in the sense like they have so many things going, with their internships and their projects and all that stuff. So their schedules tend to be quite complex, right? So kind of like to make that work. And then, of course, we have the whole group on the other side also, right? So ahead of time, we tried to kind of make those concessions wherever we could. We were very lucky in that our partners were super flexible. We were able to arrange that. So there's that to take into account, right? That yes, nothing is going to be US-centric necessarily, nor does it need to be. And we have to kind of be prepared to kind of give a little bit. And I think I'll let Lillian talk a little bit more about what it meant for the students themselves in terms of like the adapting to the meetings and whatnot.
Thank you. And I completely agree with Gorky. Definitely the time frames, right? The schedule could be challenging. And sometimes students will get it right. And when we divided the classes into subgroups, sometimes they completely forgot that there's some time changes all of a sudden, and it's just funny anecdotes that way. So it could be a challenge, but I think with flexibility, as Gorky mentioned, things can really improve. But if I might add, just continuing what Gorky is saying, I would love to hear what others have to say about that. It's important to see when you work with COIL, and you have to sort of let go, and this is hard, especially if you teach for a long time. Let go of the responsibility of the teaching, right? And it's not about you owning the class, it's about everyone owning the class and in the experience and the learning. And what does that mean? For example, when Gorky mentioned about the times, right? You take the time, I would say, to tell students this is an opportunity for you to own this work. If you're not here and you're not paying attention to this, you're lost. You are a vital element of this project. So you're not going to be in the typical class that sometimes you're not prepared and you have not done your reading, you go to the back. You are responsible and you are accountable. Not because there's any kinds of punishment, because this is the learning and you are essential to make this happen. So I think that could be something very positive, right? For them to say, I need to be there. I need to really concentrate on my priorities and organize myself because they need me. My team needs me, my subgroup needs me, and I really want to be here. So it's how you really work on those challenges, I think is important.
Let me give you a live example. in the middle of the course, the month of Ramadan appeared. Now, as you know, that's the month of fasting. In Pakistan, which is 10 hours ahead of the United States in terms of time, people are fasting. And in the evening, they're going to break the fast. And as Shed will tell you, as any Muslim, after fasting, they sort of switch off for a couple of hours. So they're not really able to concentrate or focus on anything. It's a tough fast. Now, I was wondering how the Pakistanis would accommodate to this and how our students would accommodate. And once again, because both were understanding that these are two different systems and they're thrown together in this course and they have to work together, they accommodated to each other. So it was understood that the students from Pakistan would take an extra hour off, they'd eat their food, they'd relax a little bit, and then join us. Because remember, for us, it's 8 a.m. For them, it's late in the evening, and that's the time they're opening the fast. So you have to juggle with that. And there again, I think what is marvelous about COIL is the fact that you are being again and again reminded that we are not living in a monolithic world, that we are living in a world full of different cultures and different traditions, and how much we appreciate them and wonder at them and embrace them. Shed's point about colonialism. All of these societies in one way or the other have been affected by colonialism. And I think that perspective also helps us understand where we are coming from, where we are engaging with the past, and where we are creating the future. I think all these features of intellectual thought are involved in discussing a subject like this.
Yeah, just kind of to tag along on that. I mean, in terms of the scheduling, right? One of the challenges was, of course, we had like the different time zones. We have like the classes that don't necessarily match, but then we have the holidays, right? So for us, it was like Thanksgiving, like right there in
Yes.
did everything out, and then suddenly Thanksgiving came up, and then we're like, oh, okay, well, we figured it out. We made our adjustments, and then the Chileans had a big thing going on as well, which, obviously it's not in our calendar. How would we know, right? So they're like, oh, well, actually, that's a very special political kind of like day, and everything is closed, and people take a couple of days. So it's gonna actually be like a 3-day holiday. So we're like, oh, right. So it wasn't really, because we were like, oh, okay, we solved the Thanksgiving thing. I mean, that's a whole week where nobody really wants to do anything. But what we ended up doing is like we made it, and here again, it's like what's really interesting about this, it like makes you think and be flexible, but also
Yes.
kind of like you're on your thinking on your feet, and then you're like, yes, and we can make this into an opportunity, right? So we gave our students, and I think some of them, Lillian can probably clarify, some of them did take advantage of this. We said, well, we're going to take this week off for Thanksgiving, but you can invite your Chilean friends, and you can connect during the Thanksgiving week on your own terms. And maybe you can invite them to kind of like explain to them what Thanksgiving is about, because for them, this is going to be something that's really foreign, and maybe they'll find it interesting to see all the preparations and what you guys are doing at home, because most of our students will travel back to their homes to celebrate with their families. And I think that some of them did. So that was kind of like something that we kind of had to do it as we run in the ground, right? So it's like, okay, this is happening, and then we just kind of turn it around, which kind of worked to their advantage also, because I think they enjoyed it, and then our students too. So maybe Lillian can tell us a little bit more about what their impressions were.
Oh, absolutely. And as Gorky said, being able to be very flexible and nimble, and said, instead of like skipping a whole week of learning, we just did an optional, right? Assessment or assignment. They didn't have to do it, but many of them actually met with their groups, and they show them around, they show their home, they show them what they did for Thanksgiving. So providing that as well, that not everything needs to be graded, right? Sometimes you just give the opportunity and allow them to either take the opportunity or not, and many of them did. So it's just wonderful to see.
I love that emphasis on not everything being graded, and sometimes like we talk about teaching as like an invitation. You invite students and they take the invitation or they don't. And usually they take it, and that's very exciting. And so I could see how COIL would be like a really exciting invitation first for some of our students, especially Lillian, like you were saying, like students who've never been the main character of the learning experience before. And so I would love to know about the projects that your students worked on for as part of their COIL courses, and how those, well, you know, what was the sort of deliverable or change that they were collaborating on?
Well, one of the projects that I had the students work on was a very difficult one, a really challenging one. But I always believe that if you have faith in your students, they rise to the occasion. Now, this was a difficult one. I was trying to teach them that A, Islam is not monolithic. B, that some of the patterns of history from the past are being repeated in society today. See that if they look under the surface, they will see clearly what is going on in the Muslim world in terms of leadership, conflict, and so on. And I wanted them to read from a play that I wrote called The Trial of Dara Shikoh. Now, you probably haven't heard the name Dara Shikoh, but the name of Dara Shikoh is as important as one of the great philosophers of history. Literally, Augustine or St. Thomas Aquinas, he's at that level. He also happened to be the crown prince of the Mughal Empire. The man who created the Taj Mahal had a son, the eldest son, and that was Dara Shikoh, and he was going to be the next emperor of India. India then, for your information, was the richest region in the world. It had a GDP per capita of about 30% of the entire world. Then the British came and shared talking about colonialism. And when the British left, its GDP had gone down to 2%. So from about 40%, it had gone to 2%. Anyway, so Dara Shikoh is now going to be the next emperor of India, and everyone is very pleased with this and happy with this. And he, of course, is a Sufi. He's a great mystic. He embraces the world. He believes in La Convivencia. He's very respected by the Hindus and the Sikhs, and they love him for his mystic thinking and Sufism. But his younger brother is more orthodox and is very rigid in his analysis of Islam. And he's also a battle-hardened general with the troops. So they fight. The younger brother wins. The elder brother is tried and executed, loses his head. So you see the great clash between two brothers, a sibling rivalry on the one hand, but there's a greater ideological clash on the other. All this is quite sophisticated for an undergrad class. But what thrills me is how quickly they got into the play. So we gave each one of them a part, each one of them a character. So one became Dara Shikoh, one became the younger brother. And suddenly these students, American students who had not heard of Dara Shikoh, let alone the Mughal Empire, were suddenly all involved in interpreting these characters. And to me as a teacher, it was so thrilling to see these students suddenly getting involved. And then they wrote a paper on this. And they explained to me what they saw in that particular character. So that is a live example of a project which I find very exciting because it works. You're seeing it work in front of your eyes.
Thank you. And that's beautiful. And I'll pass it to Gorky, who has his hand raised.
I think actually the thing picked up my gesture, but anyhow, I can get us started with what we attempted to do with the heritage class. And so this was also interesting because, again, kind of like having worked in this many, many years ago, initially the idea would be that you would find a class that sort of like exactly match yours in terms of like how many students, and maybe you're doing, especially if you're working in languages, right? You want to do an even exchange, right? So we'll teach you French, you teach us English, etc., that kind of thing. But here we had a challenge, like we didn't have an exact class, and that seemed to be a challenge. But then I were like, well, let's sit down and see what do we have in common, right? So the class in Chile is actually a marketing class. So they're working on marketing. The deliverables are very different from ours. I mean, they're working on coming up with a pitch or a video or, ad copy, right? So a marketing deliverable. And in our end, we're kind of like, what our students are there to do is to achieve a better level of academic Spanish, right? So they are good at informal, maybe they are conversant and whatnot, but they this is one of the things that they came to us with, like, what I want to be able to do is, function academically with Spanish. So that's kind of like our objectives are a little bit different. But what does this have in common with the marketing class? So we thought a little bit about it. And one of the topics that they had in the marketing class was identity, right? So they're like, oh, if you're going to be a good marketer, you have to sort of like seize on the identity of your target audience or your target public. And so kind of like, in order to sell them effectively what you want to sell, maybe you're going to appeal to their heartstrings and like, who they think they are or who they are, and sort of kind of like proceed from there. And that's exactly what our courses are all about, because, Heritage Spanish, again, it's like people, we are Americans, but we happen to be Hispanic Americans. And so we're sort of like divided, but we have this identity that defines us, right? And it's complex. And if you think about it, right, if you're Hispanic American, you're actually like doubly sort of like folded, because as Latin Americans, we're not Spanish from Europe. We are our own, but we also kind of like, we have this double sentiment of like, that the language and the culture are, like Professor Hadmet pointed out before, driven from the colonization, but at the same time we resent the colonization. So we're kind of like, no, but so we are a little bit divided. And so then you transpose that into the US, and it's kind of like, again, the same thing, right? You want to sort of preserve part of who you are, but you want to sort of assimilate at the same time, right? So it's a very complex place to be. So we figured, hey, here's something juicy that they can work on. So let's work on identity, and that way both sides get to do the deliverables, but they have like this intersecting point where they can discuss and kind of like something interesting can happen, right? So then I'll let Lillian kind of like continue the development here.
Thank you, Gorky. And I think it was beautifully described by you, the how to find the common ground, right? That itself is a task, right? Classes that could be very, very different, but they have something in common in the identities, and how you talked about your own identities, but then how you see other identities was part of the work throughout the semester. But before, I can tell you a little bit about the final product, but then later I want to rely to go back to what perhaps Luis can talk about, that before we made it to the final product, we had to do an introduction, right, of themselves. And I thought that was just so powerful, and it really set the tone of the work. Perhaps, I don't know, Luis, if you don't mind, I know that, that was something that really got us started in a very positive way.
Absolutely. So one of the essential components of a successful collaborative online international learning experience is an icebreaker. That could look like many different ways. Could just be an introduction, kind of getting to know a little bit about each other. Could be some sort of activity. But with Lillian and Gorky, there was a real opportunity to sort of like, we're all using this technology. I'm not in your physical space right now. This is high tech. We were able to incorporate something low tech, which is letters. Because they had a representative from Universidad Diego Portales come to our campus, there is an ability to make a physical exchange of letters from the Chilean students, and then back, right? Another correspondence back to the Chilean students. And so there was literally a physical component to their icebreaker. Really, the Chilean students introducing their culture, right? I know we in the US, we look at Hispanics as sort of this broad group, but we are vastly diverse within our own. And Professor Ahmed, that's what you're trying to teach in your Islam class, is like we are vastly diverse, more than the monolithic sentiments that sort of Euro-Anglo culture tries to make it out to be. And so the students from Chile were actually educating our students on some of the little fun words, because we all have our little fun words here in Spanish that don't exist anywhere else. Like each country decides, like, I'm going to say this word and no one else is going to say that. And so it was an opportunity for them to sort of exchange that cultural knowledge and understanding of each other that just turned out beautiful. And then vice versa, our students sharing their information, their excitement. And then they got a little, is it Claude? Is our mascot called Claude? I feel like
that's right.
So
That's
they got
right.
a little Claude. They got a little Claude. There's Claude hanging out in Chile. So we got to do that for our Pakistani students, Professor Ahmed. We got to send them a little Claude. But no, it was really cool to put in some physical components to Icebreaker.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah,
Luis, I
absolutely.
have to run off, but I'm enjoying this meeting so much that I'm reluctant to leave you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Ahmed.
Thank
So
you.
we
Thank
so
you so much.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Shukran.
Very exciting. Thank you. I'm honored to be part of this group. Thank you. Thank you,
Likewise.
Luis. Thank you.
Thank you. And just continue what Luis said. We could, I mean, that was such a great idea. And that was Professor Daniel Carrasco from Chile that introduced it, and we just ran with it. And boy, that was a score for all the students. Not only because they had the opportunity to really be themselves, right, and be the first one to introduce who they were in the culture, but at the same time, you have to understand these kids do not write letters by hand every day. Perhaps all folks like me had the opportunity, but they have never done it. They were scared. They say, can I type it first and then write it down? So just by going back to the very basics of that writing, remember this is our writing class, right, Luis and Gorky? Just say, this is what writing is all about. This is how powerful writing can be. I think that was just an amazing experience. And of course, once they get to know each other, they were happy to collaborate, then they work on the product. And as Gorky said, our counterparts in Chile work on an ad and a video after they presented their I would say their cultural aspects or experiences. Our students did the same, but our students work on a writing. In other words, they would just talk about a specific cultural element, and they would share it with the other group, right? Each group would do the same. And at the end, for example, the US kids would take the artifact or the cultural item that they learned from, and then they wrote about them, right? So it's just a beautiful, beautiful product overall.
Thank you for sharing that. And I just love the letters. And Gorky has shared pictures in the chat. Can you tell us a little about these?
Sure. So the first one is Professor Carrasco, Daniel. So he's the one holding the stuffed animal, the Claude there. And that there is her colleague Paola. So she works for UDP, but she works with AU abroad. So she comes back and forth between the two universities. And so generally she comes in September. So she came over and you can see her here in the classroom here at AU. So they made these little packages, with the letters and goodies from the UDP for our students. And then she took some letters back after the fact. And I think I have one more. Let me see if I can just actually throw
I
it
have
in
to
there.
say, every picture I see of our COIL programming, everyone looks so happy, and it makes me very happy.
Here's Lillian receiving the package of letters and sending. So
Oh.
the yellow one went back to Chile. You can see him holding it here. And the white package is their letters coming to our students.
Thank you for sharing this. It's beautiful.
And if may add, thank you, Gorky, for sharing. I think I mean, the visuals are just tremendous. I have some of those students that just finished another course with me, not related to COIL, and they have mentioned that they still have contact with those colleagues in Chile, and they have nothing but positive remarks to say about this experience. So I think that's very important to point out. Yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you, Gorky, for sharing.
I love to hear that. And thank you all so much. So I want to pause. I could ask you questions forever, but I'm wondering what questions our audience might have. If you don't have questions, I have way more. But what's our audience curious about? What would you like to know about COIL? Are you interested in COIL? So I want to give folks a minute to think about that and share a question in the chat or raise their hand. Yeah, Tabitha, please.
Thanks. So thank you everyone for a really interesting presentation. I enjoyed hearing about your experiences. I would be interested to know more about what you all think makes for a good project. What kind of projects get people on both ends engaged with each other, and kind of how to structure the work that students are doing together so that the COIL is successful.
I see
Gorky,
Nick
you want
and
to go
then
first?
oh, yeah.
Uh, all right. Well, I mean, I guess like one of the coming from one perspective, because there's many different answers to this particular question, right? So they could be working on something together. In our case, because the classes were different and the deliverables were quite different, we had them mostly kind of like converge around the intersection idea of identity and what that meant for everybody, and sort of that was like their work as a community, right? So they departed from there, but then each class went back to their original objectives. So we didn't modify necessarily the objectives, and that was a big important thing for us to kind of keep the integrity of the design of each class, right? As you know, we have the syllabi, we have stuff that we need to cover that we have to guarantee gets to the students, right? There's like the credits and all that stuff, right? But for us, it was important to sort of preserve the integrity of the class. So for our students, they had to deliver something written, right? And so that remained the same. So in terms of like, we didn't prepare necessarily special projects for them. They had the projects and the things that they had to deliver were already sort of specified within the class. And the addition, I guess, to that, the new layer was having this conversation to sort of like review the central piece here, which happened to be identity, and sort of hopefully involve or like draw in from the input from the other class, right? This, in a way, if you want to think about accountability of how this happened and how people experienced it, we did have a final session that was kind of a general community session with everybody, where everybody had an opportunity to sort of debrief about what their experience was like and what they got out of it. So that was kind of like the piece that was sort of attached to the COIL experience, right, as a whole group. But in terms of the projects, they were determined already for each class, as originally sort of designed by the course designer.
And if I can continue, Gorky is exactly right. And going back to Tabitha's question, it's a good question. And I think it really depends on the kind of class you have and the kind of partner you have, right? I mean, I can see COIL to be incredible if you and your partner will come out with a problem to solve, so to speak, using different perspective, right? I think that would be quite effective. In our case, as Gorky mentioned, we did not necessarily work on a particular problem or issue, but instead we focus on our own learning outcomes and the expression of identity through cultural experiences or items. So the expression part of the project was the product itself, as Gorky described. And I think that worked pretty well, because at the end, they have to show not only what they thought they were all about, part of their culture, but also how they saw the other culture after learning from the colleagues from the other side of the globe. So in that case, it was different, but going back to the learning outcomes is important, right? So don't get overwhelmed that you don't need to create anything new or change your entire class for this. Is how do you assess the learning outcomes in a different way instead of changing the class completely? I think it's very important to have. And now, and Gorky can expand even more for us, we understood after we did this year that the next step for us is to really focus on that space of collaboration and how are we going to have a common place to show that work, right? And Gorky, I don't know if you're happy, if you want to expand on that's
Sure.
the next part. That's what we're going to work on. We have not done it, but that's what we're working on, just to show you how we plan on this.
Yeah, so just as a little bit of background for everybody, this is not the kind of project. So what we undertook It's not the kind of project where we are together for the duration of the semester, because that would be very challenging and very time consuming. And also, again, going back to what we're responsible for, it would be very disruptive, right? To sort of accommodate all of that throughout the semester. So when I sort of like drug Lillian into this, I said, don't worry, because they're not looking for something, that goes like the old-fashioned COIL would have been like, let's match the classes for the whole semester and let's go with it, right? So they said they're looking for a commitment, like where we can be very flexible and that. So we settled on, doing a project that kind of went over a month out of the whole semester. So that's 4 weeks. So that's what we settled on. We started with something a little shorter, and then because like of the holidays and whatnot, as we explained before, that sort of like ended up being 4 weeks, which kind of is like a comfortable thing. Again, to minimize the disruption within your plans, right, of what you have in terms of your syllabus and whatnot. But at the end of the whole thing, when we did our final sort of community reunion and we talked, we debriefed and all that, surprisingly, what the students were clamoring for is like, we wish we had more time to kind of hang out and learn more about each other and whatnot, right? So so of course also we take that into, that feedback into account. And so and we wanted to have like sort of a unified platform too. So there's a couple of things, and this is an ongoing thing. Lillian and I went in and we say, hey, let's try it out. It'll be fun for the students, and we'll probably learn a couple of new things. And it's a pilot, so we kind of got into our mindset. It's like everything goes and everything is going to be okay because it's a pilot, right? Nobody's going to die. But, so we got all that feedback. And so now we're going into COIL point 2.0, right? And so we're kind of like driving into incorporating all of that feedback. And so what we're thinking for this next semester is having like a unified place where they can get together and work on their deliverables together and show them. And also to make that learning visible, because, like we saw it, the students saw it, we had the presentations, but it was only like class level. And so we're hoping that in the next iteration, we're going to be working with Google Sites. So it's going to be an enclosed site that's obviously not publicly available, but it's available to the students in both universities. So we're going to leverage that technology and incorporate that in order to get people to be able to work with each other in real time if they choose to, or asynchronously. And then sort of like there will be a documentation, there will be something for them to show. And for us going forward also, like, so the next time we have something like this, we'll take you for a little spin, and we'll show you the students' products, right? So you can actually see what they did. So yeah, so this semester we're kind of like trying to concentrate a little bit more in having common spaces across the institutions, and also making that learning visible going forward.
Nick, did you have any other thoughts to share on that, or I thought you had unmuted earlier?
Just to keep an open mind about the potential for cross-disciplinary COILs was my piece. Not to repeat anything anybody said, I worked on another COIL with a university in Venezuela in a SIS class, and they were a documentary film class, and we were senior capstone class. We settled on a theme, which was migration and human rights. And what actually works well in terms of the project is the delegation of tasks. The documentary students were doing documentary, the AU students were doing interviews and writing, and it came together with the combined conversations to create a final product. So cross-disciplinary could lead to some really fruitful final projects.
Thank you, Nick. Go
Sorry.
ahead, Gorky, and then we'll wrap up.
Sure. Just wanted to call your attention, both of you guys, Nick and Shed, to Rogerio's question. I think he's still here. He's kind of wondering, how do I get the ball rolling? So I think that's important to clarify that there's no necessarily like any administrative approval. It's mostly finding you a partner, and then kind of like we're saying, there's a lot of organization you want to do beforehand, and maybe you want to also include in your syllabus some sort of notation that sort of lets the students know, hey, there's a COIL component for this. But I'll let you guys like kind of.
Yeah, thank you, Gorky. So I just, so two things. I put the COIL AU email in the chat to reach out to us, and that's how you get started. And then we help you. There's no official big check mark or form to fill out. It's more so keeping an open dialogue, with your students and the people in your unit. And And that also Katrine has shared a feedback survey in the chat. Nick, was there anything else you wanted to add at the end there?
Yeah, when you reach out to us, if you have a course in mind that you think would be really conducive to coiling, let us know, and we would love to open that conversation with you.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. A huge thank you to our faculty panelists. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us. I'm happy to hang around for a few minutes to talk more about COIL, but we really appreciate your attendance and look forward to possibly doing a COIL with you in the future and answering any questions you have about it. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you to the panelists. Thank you all.